Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the annual webinar sponsored by the Crash Modification Factors Clearinghouse team. My name is Karen Scurry, and I'm the Federal Highway Program Manager for the CMF Clearinghouse. And for today's webinar, we will be looking behind the curtain with a spotlight on CMFs, DDSA, and decision-making processes in Wisconsin, North Carolina, and beyond. We have a pretty full agenda for you today, and so I'll get things started by providing an overview of CMFs and the CMF Clearinghouse. Then you'll hear from Taha Saleem with the UNC Highway Safety Research Center and also manager of the CMF Clearinghouse. Taha will provide an overview of the recently updated CMF Clearinghouse rating system, as well as some of the resources that are available for your assistance. Taha and I will try to be brief so that we have sufficient time for our guest speakers. We have we'll hear from two states today. The first being Kevin Scopoline with the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. Kevin will discuss WisDOT's data-driven safety analysis efforts and how they use CMFs from the clearinghouse in this process. And then we'll also hear from Brian Murphy and Daniel Carter with the North Carolina Department of Transportation, as well as Joy Davis and Daniel Findley with the North Carolina State University Institute for Transportation Research and Education on North Carolina DOT's use of safety benefit factors in the strategic transportation investment process. I know I'm really excited to hear about these two efforts, and I'm sure that you are too. And then last but not least, we'll wrap up with Raghavan Srinivasan from UNC's Highway Safety Research Center. And Srini will provide an overview of various current and recently completed CMF-related NCHRP projects. So before we get started, I just wanted to review a couple of housekeeping items with all of you. First, if for some reason your computer or web browser freezes during the webinar, don't panic, just reload your website and log back into the program. You should be able to join the session, no problem. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll post the recording as well as the PowerPoint and written responses to any questions we're not able to get to the CMF Clearinghouse website in the next couple of, well, normally I would say days, but given the holidays, we'll say in the next couple of weeks, we'll get those posted to the Clearinghouse website. We have muted everyone's audio for today's webinar. We're super excited. We have a record number of registrations this year, well over 550 people registered for today's webinar, and so muting your audio helps us cut down on any confusion or background noise. As an attendee, you have a control panel in the upper right corner of your screen that collapses and expands by clicking the red arrow. Even though you'll be muted, you'll still have the ability to ask questions by entering them in the question box, which is located within the control panel. I would encourage you to ask questions related to the presentations as we go along by typing them in the chat, in that chat or question box, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can at the end of the presentations today. If you have any technical problems during the webinar, you can also enter them in that chat or question pod, and we'll be monitoring those questions and hopefully be able to help you resolve any issues that you might have. We also have questions for you that we'll ask through poll questions throughout the webinar, and then starting with this first one to help us determine how many participants we have with us today. So Caroline, if you can bring up that first poll question, I would ask all of you just to respond and tell us how many people are attending from your location. And Caroline, I forgot that I can't see the poll. So if you could just let me know what the responses are looking like.
I just went ahead and closed it. It looks like the majority of folks are attending as single participants, 92%.
Okay, I guess that's to be expected as many of us are still at work from home status. So great. It looks like we have well over 300 folks online with us now. So we'll go ahead and jump right into the meat of the program. And as I said, I'll get us started with an overview of CMFs and the CMF Clearinghouse. We always like to start basic because I know we have new users to the clearinghouse that join us every year, as well as our ongoing and continuous users. I think it's always helpful maybe to take a step back and get a refresher on what resources and features are available in the CMF Clearinghouse. So we'll just get started with a quick definition of what is a crash modification factor. So a CMF is a multiplicative factor that reflects the expected safety effectiveness of a countermeasure, and practitioners use the CMF to compute the expected number of crashes after implementing a given countermeasure at a specific site. And so you'll see we have 3 examples here. So if you have a CMF of 1, that means that there's no change in crashes. If your CMF is greater than 1, that means that there's an increase in crashes. And if your CMF is less than 1, that means that there is a decrease in crashes. And so we have a couple of examples underneath that table. And so just as an example, if you have a CMF of 0.8, that represents a 20% reduction in the number of crashes. And so that 20% is the crash reduction factor equivalent of that 0.8 CMF. Similarly, if you have a CMF of 1.2, that represents a 20% increase in the number of crashes you might expect from implementing that countermeasure at a specific site. And so the next question we'll answer is, what is the CMF Clearinghouse? And the CMF Clearinghouse really has 3 main purposes or objectives. The first is to provide a regularly updated online repository of CMFs. We review the literature on a quarterly basis to identify new CMFs that have been published over the past quarter and update them to the CMF Clearinghouse once they go through our review process. And so having that mechanism for sharing those newly developed CMFs really keeps our users with the current state of practice. And then another objective of the CMF Clearinghouse is to provide educational information on both the application and development of CMFs. And so we have another poll question for you here, just to get an understanding of how often you use the CMF Clearinghouse. If you can bring that one up, Caroline. Are you a daily user, a weekly user? Maybe you only go to the clearinghouse maybe once a month, once or twice per year, or maybe you've never been to the CMF Clearinghouse and this is your first exposure to anything related to the CMF Clearinghouse. What are we seeing, Caroline? How many super users do we have?
All right, I'm sharing the quick poll. It says 10% weekly, 28% monthly, 42% once or twice per year, and 21% have never used it.
Okay. Well, welcome to those of you that have never used the CMF Clearinghouse. So hopefully you'll take some time after today's webinar to explore everything that we have to offer. I'm going to just highlight a couple of the main features that I think you'll all find very useful and maybe be a refresh for some of you that use the clearinghouse on a more regular basis. But first, I just wanted to review the inclusion criteria that we use when considering which CMFs or studies to include in the CMF Clearinghouse. And so we have 4 basic criteria that must be met before we can include the CMFs from a particular study in the Clearinghouse. The first is that the study must be crash-based, based on crash data. It must also have the objective of quantifying the safety effect of a roadway feature or characteristic. And that's because in the years we've spent doing these reviews, we found that, in some cases, there's research being done just to test models and those kinds of things. And the objective of the research was not specifically to quantify the safety effect. And so we want to make sure that we're only focusing on those studies where the primary objective of that study is to quantify the safety effect of a roadway feature or characteristic. The study must also be focused on an infrastructure characteristic, feature, or modification that would fall under engineering responsibilities. So our sister agency, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, they also produced a similar publication to the CMF Clearinghouse for behavioral countermeasures. It's called Countermeasures That Work, and we actually link to that on the CMF Clearinghouse. But that provides measures of safety effectiveness for behavioral countermeasures. So the CMF Clearinghouse is very focused on engineering type countermeasures. And then the last criteria is that the study must explicitly present quantified CMF values or CMF functions. So if the study itself does not derive that CMF value, then we will not include it in the CMF Clearinghouse. And so this is the homepage of the CMF Clearinghouse. So when you go to www.cmfclearinghouse.org, this is where you will come. And I think when most folks come to the CMF Clearinghouse, they come to search for CMFs in the database. And so that feature is very prominent here in the middle of the screen, your first option to search the database for CMFs. But there's lots of other great resources on the Clearinghouse website, and so I just wanted to take a minute to show you where you can find some of them without getting into too much detail. And so at the top of the CMF Clearinghouse page, you'll see these 4 headers about the Clearinghouse, using CMFs, developing CMFs, and additional resources. And there is, like I said, lots of great information hidden under these headers. And so the first one about the CMF Clearinghouse includes a user guide along with videos, short videos to help you navigate the Clearinghouse, search for CMFs, and filter CMFs. There's also FAQs. So if you ever have a question about anything in the Clearinghouse, I would encourage you to first come to these FAQs and see if it's answered there. We build those FAQs based on the questions that we get from our users. So there might be some useful information in those FAQs for you. The STAR quality rating, I think Taha is going to talk about this more, but this is where you'll find all the information about how we assign the STAR quality rating to the CMFs. And then a feature that we added, maybe it was a couple of years ago, is a data download or an API, if you're familiar with that terminology. This would allow you to download the entire CMF Clearinghouse database as of that current moment when you download the data to either XML, Excel, or CSV file. And so that's a feature that if you're trying to integrate it into another software or tool, that might be helpful to you. Or if you're just more comfortable filtering and searching through Excel, you could just download the whole database at that moment in time and in one of those 3 formats. The using CMFs, as the name implies, includes resources to help you apply CMFs. So there's a quick reference guide, information about training, as well as some safety analysis videos related specifically to CMFs. Developing CMFs includes resources related to developing quality CMFs. But underneath this, heading on the toolbar, we also have a CMF most wanted list that I'm not sure many folks are aware of. And we update that every couple of years based on the things that you're searching for but not finding in the Clearinghouse, hoping that that might spur some additional research ideas. And then there's 2 other features under the developing CMFs that would allow or provide directions for you to either submit a research need, or if you've completed a research study that's produced a CMF, you can submit that directly to us instead of waiting for us to find that in our literature reviews. And then lastly, under the additional resources, you'll find information related to other CMF-related topics like SPS, benefit cost analysis, and this is where you'll also find state-specific CMF lists. So if your state has a CMF list and we're aware of that, we put it here on the CMF Clearinghouse. If your state has a list and it's not here, but you want us to include it, you can send that to us and we can get that uploaded there for you. So like I said, lots of great information available here on the Clearinghouse. I would encourage you to take some time and explore the resources that are available to you here. But in the meantime, I really did want to highlight a couple of ways that you can search the CMF Clearinghouse. And so the first way is when you come to the home screen, there's that search bar there, and you can enter any term related to the treatment that you're looking for, and you can search by countermeasure name. You can search the study abstract for that term. You can search the study citation. So if you're looking for a study by a particular author, you can enter their name in the search term and select study citation, and it will bring back all the studies that are in the Clearinghouse from that author. Another popular way to search the Clearinghouse is using the CMF ID. So every CMF in the Clearinghouse is assigned a unique ID. And if you have that, you can enter that in the search term and just search by the CMF ID to get that. Here on the home page, we also include frequent searches. So there are 5 frequent searches that you can just click roundabout, and we'll bring you to all the CMFs in the clearinghouse for roundabouts, or pedestrian, and you'll get all the CMFs in the clearinghouse for pedestrian. So that's just a quick search based on what we find are the frequent searches in the CMF Clearinghouse database. So that's probably the most common way to search for CMFs, but I think right now we have almost 9,000 CMFs in the clearinghouse for well over 800 countermeasures. It's probably more now. And that's a lot of CMFs. So by entering your search terms, that will help you narrow the amount of results that you get back. And so we also have a filter function on the CMF Clearinghouse to help you further narrow that. So of those 9,000 CMFs we have, you can see here that I hit that default frequent search for roundabouts, and we have 312 CMFs in the clearinghouse for roundabouts. So that's much less than 9,000, but that's still quite a few CMFs to search through to find the one that's most applicable to your analysis. And so you can, on the search results page, you can further filter by countermeasure category here. So by clicking the left arrow, you can drop down and search that countermeasure category. Or on the left toolbar on that search results page is a filter option. So you can filter by star quality rating, country, crash type, crash severity, whether or not that CMF was published in the first edition of the Highway Safety Manual, and that will help you further reduce the number of CMFs based on whatever features are most important to you in finding the CMF most applicable to your site. So you can search on the home page, you can filter CMFs, and then once you've applied those filters, chances are you're still going to have quite a few that meet your search criteria. And so another tool that we introduced a couple of years ago is a comparison tool. So on that search results page, you can select up to 4 CMFs and compare them. And the results will return to you with the differences between each of those CMFs will be highlighted in gray and bold italics. And so I selected these 3 on the right. They were by the same author, and they applied to all crash types, all area types, but the CMFs were different. They had different star ratings, and so I was curious as to what the difference was between these 3 here on the right. And you can see that they're by the same author. One CMF is for both 3 and 4 leg intersections. One is for just 3 leg, and one is for 4 leg. And so that helps you further select the best CMF for your application scenario. And once you find the CMF that you want, you can click on the CMF value itself, and it will take you to what we call the CMF details page. That will help you better understand the CMF and the condition that it applies to. And so this is just a snapshot of the PDF export. So for every CMF details page, you can export that to a PDF and save it in your project file so that you have that for future reference. And this details page includes information about the applicability of the CMF, which is very important in making sure that the CMF you choose is applicable to your scenario. It also includes study development details, so the location of the study, what city, state, or country it's from, the methodology that was used to develop the CMF, and as well as the sample size. And then there are some other details, like the date it was added to the clearinghouse. And there's also a comment section for every CMF. So if our reviewers find something that they think would be of note to our users, they capture that there in the comments. And so that's an important field just to scroll down and see if there's anything in there that we wanted to bring to your attention when you're looking at CMFs in the clearinghouse. So those were just a couple of features of the clearinghouse that I wanted to highlight for all of you. Hopefully you learned something new or remembered something that was available to you in the clearinghouse through that demonstration. I want to thank you for your time. And if you have any questions for me, you can put them in the chat pod, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of today's webinar. And with that, I will turn it over to Taha.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. So my name is Taha Saleem. And as Karen mentioned, I will be giving you a brief overview of the new CMF Clearinghouse rating system. And I will also briefly go over the resources that are available for you as users, to better understand the new CMF ratings. Now, before we begin, I have a small poll question for you. So Caroline, if you can pull the poll question up. The question is, are you aware that the CMF Clearinghouse rating system transitioned to a new rating system, basically? And you have three options: yes, no, or not sure. So please go ahead, and register your responses there. So Caroline, maybe we can close the poll and you can maybe just summarize what are we seeing there?
40% responded yes, 55 responded no, 4% responded not sure.
Well, yep. So for the nearly 60%, who are no or not sure, that's why we have this presentation here today in the webinar to give you an overview, of what changed, and also the resources that are available, for you to use to better understand those changes. So let's get going. Let's start with the big question. Why did the CMF Clearinghouse transition to a new rating criteria? So to give you guys a bit of a background, the legacy CMF star rating system was in use, since the inception of the clearinghouse in 2009. And in the recent years, NCDOT project 17-72 developed a new CMF rating system to update the CMFs for the second edition of the Highway Safety Manual. And with this, the CMF Clearinghouse rating system transitioned on February the 15th, 2021, which is about 8 months ago, to be consistent with the 17-72 rating scheme. Now, this new system, is very detailed and rigorous, and it also provides scores for various different factors. So we're going to use the next few slides here, just to go over the legacy system and the new system. So in the legacy system, we use a single rating scheme to rate the CMFs, whether they were developed from before-after, cross-sectional, meta-analysis, or meta-regression studies. And that scheme was a straightforward scheme based on 5 criteria. And those 5 criteria were study design, sample size, standard error, biases, and data sources. So in the legacy scheme, study design and sample size were given a weight of 2, whereas all the other criteria carried a weight of 1. And points were assigned to each criteria based on the level of rigor. So we had three levels: excellent, fair, and poor. So an excellent would equate to 2 points, fair to 1 point, and poor to 0 point. And overall, as a result of this rating, the maximum number of possible points a CMF could get under the legacy system was 14. Now, the current or the updated CMF Clearinghouse rating system provides separate rating criteria for CMFs developed using a before-after, cross-sectional, meta-analysis, and meta-regression studies. So as you can see on the chart here, the ratings for the before-after and cross-sectional studies considers for factors such as the sample size, the study design, the methodology, and the standard errors to determine significance. On the other hand, the ratings for the meta-analysis and meta-regression studies considers for factors such as the data, methodology, the individual CMF quality for the CMFs being combined, the appropriateness of combining, appropriateness of analysis, and also the significance of the individual CMFs that are being combined. So within these 4 big categories, there are multiple levels, and the points are assigned for each level for a maximum possible score of 150 points. I have a link at the bottom of my slide here. You can always visit, the star quality rating page at that link. And it provides you more details, about the rating criteria for the 4 study types and the details of the different levels and different factors, that lead to the 150 points that I'm talking about here. So now that we have talked briefly about both the legacy and the current star rating system, let's talk, now how have the star ratings changed? So the major change, as we mentioned in the slides, is going from a 14-point rating scale to a more rigorous 150-point rating scale. Under the legacy rating system, to get a 5-star rating, a CMF should have scored a maximum possible 14 points. Whereas under the current rating system, CMF must score between 135 to 150 points to get a 5-star rating. Now, one thing that's important to note is that while star ratings may have changed under the current system, the CMF themselves haven't. All the CMF values are the same. One thing that is common under both the legacy and the current star rating system is that the CMF must score at least 50% of the total possible points, which will be 7 points in the legacy system and 75 points in the current system to receive a 3-star rating. So before we talk about the resources that are available for you to better understand the rating changes, we have another poll question for you, and Caroline could bring it up. So the poll question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not important and 5 being very important, if you can rate the relative importance of CMF star quality ratings to you and your work. Caroline, maybe you can tell us what are we seeing for the responses? Caroline, I think if you can close the poll and just let us know, or what are you seeing for the responses?
Yes. 29% are responding 5, very important. 46% are responding 4, 15% 3, 5% 2, and 4% 1, not important.
So it looks like a majority of people, for majority of people, the ratings are either very important or somewhat important, And with that, we can move to our next thing, So as we can see from that poll, that for a lot of you, it is very important, that the star quality ratings, they have a say in your decision making. And we also understand, that users like you have been using the star ratings, to inform your decision making. Now, the transition to the current rating system has led to a few instances, where the star ratings for the current CMFs have changed. So there were some CMFs that were rated higher under the legacy system that would score low under the current system. And we also have flip side, where there were some CMFs that were rated lower under the legacy system that have scored higher under the current system. And to minimize the impact of these changes, we have included, various resources for users to better understand these changes. And all those resources are available to you on the CMF Clearinghouse website, and we can go one by one. So to summarize everything, all the resources and frequently asked questions, that would relate to the CMF, the rating change, are listed on the updated star ratings page that can be accessed, using the link that is shown on the slide here. And it's also available, and one of the feature boxes on the main on the home page of the website. So if you go on the home page of the website, you'll see one of the features, the third feature box there, it should say updated CMF star ratings. If you click on that, that gets you to this page, where you can access a lot of information, about what has changed. We also have a ratings comparison spreadsheet, that's available on the updated CMF star ratings page, which we saw on the last slide, and it's also downloadable using the link that I've shown on the slide at the bottom. So this spreadsheet, it provides both the legacy and the current ratings for all CMFs. When I say all CMFs, I want to be clear, it's all CMFs prior to February 15 transition deadline. And it's a tool, for you to identify any star ratings changes to your CMFs of interest. So if you have a CMF list, that you have been using CMF from before, you can come in and search by CMF ID to just check, if for the CMF that you have been using, whether the star ratings are same, whether they have gone down or whether they have went up as a result of the new rating system. Now, since we're talking about the star ratings page, the star quality rating page, which is housed under the About Clearinghouse drop-down menu, as Karen mentioned in her presentation, it provides you details about the new rating system and the various thresholds, a study must meet to get a higher star rating. And it can be accessed, as under the drop-down menu for About the Clearinghouse, or I have the link on my slide as well that you can use to access it directly. Furthermore, if you look at the CMF, so CMF details page, guys, it also provides, the star quality rating and the total rating points a CMF received, along with other relevant information to aid in CMF applicability decisions. So there's also a view score details button, right next to the star quality rating. And if you click on that one, that would open a new window for you with details of how the CMFs fared under the various rating categories. And I also have a link at the bottom here, a generic link, that if you know a CMF ID of your interest, or you have been using CMF ID before, you can replace all the access here, in my link with the CMF ID, and it will take you directly to CMF details page for the specific ID. Now, if you click the view score details page, here's an example of the score details page. And in this page, you would see all the information about the rating inputs for the various factors, what data was reported in the studies, and the subsequent rating scores. So we have tried to be as transparent as possible, for users. If you see your study is included in the clearinghouse, you can clearly go and see, what information we were able to extract from your studies and how were they rated. if you see anything that's incorrect or there are any discrepancies, we encourage you, if it's your paper, you can reach out to us and we can always, take a look and see, what was wrong, and we can always fix that. So the main reason why we are providing these details now is to be more transparent, with our processes with you guys. So that's all, that I have, guys, for my overview of the resources. If you have any questions, you can enter this in the GoToWebinar window. And I have my contact information here. You have my email. If you have any further questions about the new rating system or any of the resources, please feel free to email me, and I can respond, with and help you out, to make sure that that you better understand those changes and how to implement them in your work. So thank you very much. And I think our next presenter would be Kevin.
Hi, welcome everybody. Like Taha said, my name is Kevin Scopoline. I am one of the traffic safety engineers at Wisconsin DOT, and I've been invited today to talk about how we utilize CMFs in some of our data-driven safety analysis. Just want to make sure, hopefully everybody's seeing my screen and can hear me. Caroline, if you want to confirm that, that'd be great.
We can, yes, Kevin.
Perfect. Okay. So a lot of this really kind of stems from how safety analysis has evolved or changed, especially since what I've seen in all of our justification for projects of, before it was, we know this will improve safety because it meets the standards that we've set out for ourselves, to now really digging into more of that quantitative, well, this is how many crashes there's going to be, utilizing all the different tools and methodologies that we have at our disposal. So a lot of that for us in Wisconsin comes from our two different processes, and the best way for me to talk about our use of CMFs is to talk about these two different ones. And the first is our safety certification process. It is used for all of our improvement projects. So anytime that we want to add in a safety element on those projects, we'll go through this process. We also, for our highway safety improvement program, we'll utilize CMFs to try and see where we can go out and make improvements across the entire state, and not just on our state projects, but also get at locals, the local networks. And with these two different processes, we have slightly different analysis tools. So the CMF needs for each are a little bit different, and I'll dive into those details and how they, the different needs are met for the two different programs. Before we get into that though, first poll question for me is, what tools are you using to perform your safety analysis? And then Caroline, go ahead, and whenever you think the results are in, just go ahead and let us know.
56% of participants said spreadsheet-based tool, 16% tie for IHSDM and other, and SPF tool 11%.
Okay, great. Yeah, the spreadsheet tools are pretty ubiquitous. I would say a lot of people are pretty confident and comfortable using a spreadsheet, and it does allow a lot of flexibility, which is really good. So we actually utilize two main tools, spreadsheet tools and IHSDM, and it depends on where we are at with our analysis. And not every single situation can be, I'd say, modeled using a safety performance function, or SPF. So when we can't use an SPF, whether we don't have the right facility type SPF, or if the volumes or some other criteria makes it outside of the applicable range, we use method one, which is applying a CMF to our observed crashes to yield what we've termed the estimated crashes. And as we go down this list, we improve our reliability. So we'd like to try and use methods 2 or 3, which are more of that safety performance function based methodology whenever possible. And ideally, if we can incorporate that past crash history to try and get that long-term average in method 3, we're going to do that too. So you can see that we either have estimated, predicted, or expected crashes depending on what level of reliability we get using different methods. For us, method 1 is that spreadsheet tool where we just use a CMF and multiply it by our observed crashes. Methods 2 and 3, we utilize IHSDM. That is a free software sponsored by FHWA and has been very, very helpful in getting us to a point where we now have an institutionalized process to perform our safety analysis. I do have a caveat that we will use CMFs in all of the different methods, just because there's always a new treatment or some great new idea coming out that when these models were developed, it wasn't included. And I use the term external CMF, which really is just Part D CMFs, since right now in the Highway Safety Manual, they use the term CMF for 2 different things. One is where it's more essentially an adjustment factor to the safety performance function. And then again, the ones that I call external CMFs are those Part D CMFs, the ones that look at things like a high friction surface treatment or RFB or some other application that was developed later on as a standalone study. So all those external CMFs can be utilized in any of our methods for analysis. And when we use it in IHSDM, because IHSDM is not a spreadsheet tool and it's programmed, we have some limitations. There are certain things that you can and can't do with CMFs within IHSDM, and they're kind of up on screen. But the biggest one for us is that we limit the number of CMFs that we use, because IHSDM assumes that they're independent of one another. It can make it challenging for us to say, well, yeah, use 5 different CMFs and they're all going to work perfectly, when we know that they're not always going to be independent. There is potential for overlap and interference between the 2 or more than 2 CMFs available. So that's kind of why we limit the number, so that way we can hopefully control that error from growing beyond a reasonable range. So an example of this is, let's say we have a 2-lane road that has a curve with the issue of run off the road crashes. We want to go ahead and add in shoulder rumble strips, and we're going to add in a high friction surface treatment. As you can see in the diagram, these 2 treatments are not independent. They are in the same location, targeting the same crash types. So, we have to do a little bit of extra work to make sure that we're accounting for that non-independence. And when we have that, we want to try and combine more than one CMF because of that. We use 2 different methods. We will either use the dominant common residuals or the dominant effect method. Basically, it's just a way for us to say, okay, we know that these 2 are going to impact one another in some way, and which is going to be the most appropriate way for us to move forward with a CMF value. So, for example, if we pick out 2 CMFs, one that has a 0.92 for the shoulder rumble strips and one for high friction surface of a 0.76, we have a spreadsheet tool that will enter those values into, and then it'll do the calculations for us. And then these combined CMFs would be what we would put in. As you can see here, it makes more sense for us just to use that most effective one. So in this case, we're just going to use a 0.76, saying that the rumble strips are going to be helpful. We know that they could help, but the main focus of our analysis, so that we're not overestimating those benefits, is going to be on the high friction surface treatment. And then in IHSDM, again, we just put that in for the length of the curve. So that's really our safety certification process and utilizing IHSDM. Again, if we wanted to look at the same example, but for our HSIP program, since this is going to be more of a spreadsheet-based tool, more of a spreadsheet-based analysis, we have a little bit more flexibility. We can choose some slightly different CMFs, things that are more specific to the crash types that we're targeting. In this case, those run-off-the-road crashes. And what we can do with our tool is, look at the specific severities, and then again, the big one is the crash types. And again, we're going to look more at those run-off-the-road left and run-off-the-road right crashes. So our CMF for the high-friction surface treatment would be the same as before. Now, since we have the flexibility for the crash type, we can choose a different CMF. Again, all these come from the clearinghouse, and when we enter it into our spreadsheet, I apologize, I have left some things off. There's a lot of behind the scenes calculations for this, but the main focus is that when we put it in, you can see that we're only putting in the run off the road crashes for our shoulder rumble strips, and then the high friction surface targets all of our crash types. So those will get, oops, that was a little far. So those will get combined and then run through our HSIP program. But again, using the spreadsheet-based tools, we have a little bit more flexibility, whereas in IHSDM, we couldn't do specific crash types. Everything is for the all. Because we have two different programs and the ways in which we can utilize CMS between the programs differs, it can have an impact. And a lot of it comes down to the software limitations. I personally really enjoy IHSDM. I think that it is a good tool in order for us to utilize safety performance functions, which is, I think, a more robust way of looking at safety analysis compared to just applying a CMF to the observed crash history. But with that program comes limitations on how we can use CMFs and how we can apply them and which ones that we can use. I think Karen mentioned earlier that there's over 9,000 CMFs in the clearinghouse right now. All of them can't be utilized within IHSDM due to some of the specifics in terms of crash types and severities and different things that they target. So knowing that limitations exist causes us to have a backup, a spreadsheet for us to be able to get around some of those limitations and make sure that we can hopefully analyze all the possible scenarios that come through between the two programs. And again, because there are so many CMS in the clearinghouse, we wanted to try and be a little bit more clear with folks on which ones to use, which ones we think are good and appropriate for use in Wisconsin. So we created a WisDOT CMF table. I believe it is accessible through the clearinghouse as our other state-specific CMF tables. If not, it's always on our website as well. And we're actually going to be going through and updating it now that the CMF Clearinghouse has actually updated the star rankings. We want to make sure that everything kind of gets reflected of that, see what's new. And so there should be a larger update to that table, hopefully in this new year. Just a couple of resources that I know I've found very useful. First and foremost is the clearinghouse. I know Karen and Taha talked a lot about it, so I don't need to go into depth. A couple of other ones are the NHI courses. A lot of those have been really good in understanding and developing CMFs. And then I can't say enough good things about the EDC, DDSA webinars and technical support, which includes the support for IHSDM. FHWA has done a great job and will continue supporting IHSDM through, I think it's September of 2024. So all these resources have been very helpful. And if you have any questions, very, very good. I would highly recommend going out and asking. There's always a good response back. I think my last poll question is more to our users about, have you developed your own CMFs?
And the answer to that question is 57% say no, 17% say yes, 14 would like to but don't have the expertise, 11% would like to but don't have enough data.
Great, thanks, Caroline. Yeah, developing your own. You know, we've done it a little bit through the help of our university partners at Wisconsin. The data one is always tricky. I think trying to share data amongst states would be very, very good and instrumental in trying to help get some more quality CMFs out there for the newer treatments. I know for us, one of the things that we always get asked is, has anybody else done this? You know, what's the record like? How good is it? And you know, a standard now, or at least for us in Wisconsin, is, well, what does the CMF say? You know, can we go out and can we find one? And so anytime that you have a new treatment, a new idea, it can be kind of hard to sell it if you don't have that data. And you know, I would highly recommend, if you can, work with some university partners. If you have any novel ideas, getting it out there, you know, maybe talking to other states to pool data, so that way these ideas can spread. I know I talk kind of fast. I hopefully explained all of my acronyms, but if not, please put them in the chat pod if you have any other questions, anything that I went over. I would love to talk more in depth about it. I think with that, that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you, Kevin. We'll turn it over to our friends in North Carolina now. I'm not sure, is that Joy and Brian going to get us started?
Yep, thanks, Karen. Hope you can see my screen all right.
Yes.
And yeah, appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about a research project that we worked on in North Carolina with the Highway Safety Research Center, as well as the Institute for Transportation Research and Education at North Carolina State University. So I'm going to kind of kick off the slides and then going to quickly transition over to Joy Davis, who's going to talk about more of kind of the meat of the project and the actual research that was done. I'm going to give a little bit of background on the project, and again, after that, Joy's going to kind of go into to the nuts and bolts of the research. So for context, it's important to know that North Carolina Department of Transportation does have a data-driven approach to project prioritization. And I guess at this point, I should probably define project. Here we're talking more about capital improvement type projects, so a TIP type project, not just the safety projects specifically. So NCDOT has a budget of about $5 billion, so about $2.5 billion of that goes to capital improvement type projects, and so that's the projects that we're talking about here. That data-driven approach is written into law. That was a law that was signed back in 2013, and it basically says that the department should come up with a process for a selection of transportation projects and use a systematic data-driven process. There's some room for qualitative in some areas, which I'll get to in a second, but it is very much a data-driven process. So that prioritization process basically kind of divides our capital improvement project funds into 3 pots, and so 40% of that money goes to a statewide mobility pot or fund, and the selection of projects in that fund is 100% data driven, and those are really projects that are focused on addressing significant congestion or bottlenecks in our state. The other 2 pots of fund, 30% to regional impact projects and then 30% to division needs projects, are still primarily data driven, but there is some room there for some local input points. So our divisions and our MPOs and RPOs get some sway on some of those projects that that they'd like to see funded there. Much less money as you kind of go down each of those funds there. So what is the quantitative part of this? What are we scoring these projects on? And essentially the categories of scores there are the same, regardless of which pot of money that you're looking at. It's just that the breakdown percentages change slightly through those. So we're concerned with how do we quantify those safety benefits, just much like we just heard earlier, where they're looking at using this information, quantifying safety benefits as part of their decision-making process. Same concept here. And so safety really shows up in two factors here in our scoring criteria. One is there's a standalone category for safety. And then there's also a benefit cost. Safety gets factored into the benefit cost of each project as well. And so that's essentially how safety is accounted for in the project scoring process. Some of the challenges that we've run into with quantifying the safety benefits for all projects in this prioritization process, one is just a matter of scale. So this latest round of prioritization, there were over 1,200 projects submitted for a scoring, which was about a $54 billion submission for projects that had to be scored. So really needed certainly kind of an automated process if we're going to look at that many projects each scoring cycle. And then another big thing is that for a lot of these projects, there was a lack of detailed information. So, for example, some projects, the project description was just simply improve intersection. And so, difficult to tell if they were intending that to be a roundabout, traffic signal, turn lane. Obviously, those have very different costs and very different safety impacts as well. And our safety benefits must fit within our prioritization office's project categories, or they're called SITs here, so specific improvement types. And to give you an idea of what those look like, there's basically 26 categories that you could submit a project in. And so each project that gets submitted gets assigned one of these categories. So you can see they can be pretty specific, such as converting a grade separation to an interchange, or can be very vague, such as improve intersection. And I will say that we can kind of fine tune these projects a little bit more, again, based on how much detail is in the actual submission information. And so our challenge here is basically to quantify the safety benefits for these projects. And so we've kind of coined this term safety benefit factors. They're not the same as crash modification factors, so we did not want to use that term specifically, whereas crash modification factors typically describe a very specific treatment, such as convert two-way stop control to a roundabout, or convert two-way stop control to an all-way stop control. Safety benefit factors describe a specific improvement type category or subcategory. So they're at a little bit of a higher level in some cases. They're more planning level type factors. And so we did call them something different just to make sure that we distinguish them from crash modification factors. Having said that, the safety benefit factors in this scoring process are treated the same way as crash modification factors are in regards to how we would go about quantifying safety benefits. So when we're converting or determining the monetary value of a project, benefit cost, we're using them the same way that we would use a crash modification factor, but we did want to make that distinguished there. And the biggest challenge really on some of these was that there's really a gap in the knowledge regarding to the safety benefits of some highway improvement types. And I'll kind of switch back over here to the specific improvement type listing. And so for this research, we really focused on two of those areas where we did not have a lot of information. So the first one here was widen existing roadway. There was not a lot of safety information out there for widening an existing roadway, particularly in urban areas. Obviously, that's not a treatment that's typically done for safety. It's typically done for capacity reasons. And then also constructing a roadway on new locations. So, and this really is kind of getting at those bypass type projects. So where we're constructing a new roadway on new location to kind of bypass a small town. Again, that's not something that's typically done for safety, and there's not a lot of research out there on what the safety impacts of that may be, which is just obviously kind of a network impact for those types of treatments. And so that kind of leads into the research project that Joy's going to talk about here in just a second. But as we transition, we do have a poll question for you. So Caroline, you want to pull that one up, but that question is, does your agency have a data-driven process for safety prioritization that incorporates the expected safety benefits? And you got a few different options there. So no, process does not incorporate expected safety benefits, or yes, it does, but in maybe a qualitative way, such as minimal, moderate, or significant, or 3, yes, it does, and it does it in a quantitative way, such as using crash modification factors or something similar.
All right, so your results are 62% responded yes, process incorporates safety in a quantitative way, 23% said yes in a qualitative way, and 15 no.
Excellent, excellent. Good to know. Yeah, it's good to know that that many agencies are, incorporating safety in a quantitative way. That's excellent. With that, I'm going to kind of turn things over to Joy now, who's going to again kind of get into the meat of the research that was done for this project.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so just to give you a little overview of our research approach overall, we interviewed other states to find out what they were doing in this area. Given that we knew that there was a limited amount of information in the CMF Clearinghouse for many of the types of projects, they were trying to investigate as part of this project, the widening and the new location projects. We thought it might be good to go to other states to see if they've encountered the same issues and if they would have information to help us. So we went and we talked to some different states and gathered some information there and really found limited information. Many people were grappling with the same problems that we were. And then we moved on to look at what was in the clearinghouse. So were there additional 4-star and up crash modification factors that could be helpful to this project? Are there things that were new, for example, or star ratings that could have changed since NCDOT previously looked at them? And then we sort of reviewed what data was available, so we knew how that could inform our method to then develop the safety benefit factors in cases where we were lacking them or were lacking 4-star crash modification factors to apply. And so what we found was that there were some solid CMFs, 4 stars and above, in the clearinghouse, but there were no CMFs that we could find for new location projects. So that really helped inform the next steps that we took. So kind of broken this up, we're going to talk a little bit about the new location approach first, because we used a different method than we did for widening projects, and then we'll talk about the widening approach and results that we identified from there. So in terms of our approach for new location projects, it was great to see that breakdown that WisDOT provided, because that really led into this. So we looked at multiple different options for our method for developing these SBFs, and what we landed on in conversation with NCDOT was using an empirical Bayesian approach, but we're calling it naive because it is a little bit, because of our limitations of data and because these are planning level SBFs that we're creating, the method isn't quite as deep as if we would do the full EB approach. And so we did a before and after analysis with that. And essentially what that means is we compared the crashes that would be expected if the bypass was not built to the actual crashes after the building of the bypass. And then this method was chosen because it really accounts for the changes in traffic before the bypass was completed to the increase in traffic after the bypass was built. But it does not account for the effect of the bypass on overall system due to redirecting traffic from other parts of the network. And in addition, because again, we're calling this naive, and because of this is planning level, we also weren't able to get more detailed in terms of looking at the network impacts, driveways, et cetera. So there are some limitations Next slide. And overall, what this looked like was we had a sample of 16 sites in North Carolina that had undergone bypasses. And so those sites, we had the original route information and then bypass route information. So including roadway characteristics as well as the crashes that occurred before and after. And so we obtained the annual crash rates for primary routes. That's what we used after quite a bit of conversation. And then used 1996 as a baseline to scale those crashes in the following years. And part of the reason that was used and was part of the consideration was, some of these projects take a long time, and so the project before period compared to the after can be pretty far apart. And from there, we conducted a disaggregated analysis based on the facility type. And then what we found is, because as you can imagine, our sample size was so small, we found minimal differences. And so, meaning we looked at, different types of bypasses with different types of designs that could have been added. And were we seeing reasonable differences in the effects related to the treatments, depending on the type of design that was there? And we really did not find something was significant enough to recommend different types of SBFs. And so ultimately, here's what we ended up recommending based on the application of these methods for those 16 sites, and also incorporating, what we did find from the CMFs. We weren't able to find CMFs in the US, but we did find some foreign literature, which helped us know how people had looked at these types of problems in the past. And so you can see here, the way we've kind of broken this down is the first column shows the current SBF used by North Carolina. And then after that is the study developed SBF, so the one that we developed using our method, and then the recommended SBF. And so you'll see, because again, this is planning level, we try to have everything be as evidence-based and quantitative as possible. But in the case of construct a roadway on a new location freeway bypass, we decided to recommend a lower SBF that was more conservative because of the smaller amount of sites and what we knew about those types of projects and what the safety impacts could look like in reality based on our expertise. So again, the idea is we're trying to combine that evidence-based approach as much as we can using that North Carolina specific data, but also having to use some judgment as well, since these are planning level. And so from there, so that was the approach we took for those new location bypass projects, essentially. And so then we kind of shifted gears to look at the widening projects and how to approach those. And so whereas, as you saw before, there were basically 3 different types of bypass projects that we looked at. Widening projects, as many of you may know, can take many different forms. And so this is just to give you a snapshot. I'll dig into these more in a second, but this gives you a snapshot of the different types of widening projects that we tried to tackle. And so the approach here was, again, going back to the lovely overview that was provided previously already over some of the different options. In this case, we applied those safety performance functions in order to get the SPFs in cases where we didn't have existing CMFs. And in some cases, there were CMFs that we just wanted to see, okay, these CMFs were developed without North Carolina data. If we use North Carolina data, can we use our approach to kind of check against those CMFs and where they fall? And so we'll show you those results as well in a moment. But we estimated the predicted number of crashes for the before and after facility types. Then we use those HSM predictive models calibrated using North Carolina data. And then we also use North Carolina data to guide the assumptions related to like AADT and other roadside parameters. So went into that prioritization data from the prioritization process that Brian mentioned to see, okay, what types of projects were previously being conducted in North Carolina? What did the AADT values for those given specific types of widening projects look like? So we could kind of check some of our assumptions. And then we used data for this analysis that was collected as part of another NCDOT report called Updated Regional Calibration Factors for Highway Safety Manual Crash Prediction Model. So again, fell very nicely into what we were doing here. And so the results is, I'll kind of walk you through the multiple results since we had multiple different widening projects, but essentially this compared to the bypass projects because of some of the differences between the impacts of different types of widening. You'll see we really had quite a few, there's quite a range of what we identified and recommended. So we have again those current NCDOT SBFs, the SBFs that we developed, and in some cases we said, you know, the CMF in the clearinghouse is 4 stars or higher. We investigated the data. It's appropriate for these all crash types that we're interested in looking at and doing an SBF for. So we're just going to use the value from the CMF Clearinghouse because the study is a good fit for us. And so in some cases we use the study SBF that we developed. In other cases, our recommendation again was that CMF. And you can see we really tried to get granular in terms of identifying why some of these recommendations were made, because there wasn't always a clear answer, and sometimes we had to use our sort of expert judgment. And then there were cases where I think a good example of that, for example, is a case on the next slide. If you'll move forward, you'll see there's a study that has the 2 stars by it, where we recommended a 0, and that's because there actually was a CMF in the clearinghouse that had used Florida data that was 4 stars or higher, but when we dug into the study, we realized that it was looking at changes across many segments across a very large facility, and so that really didn't give us the type of more granular information that would have been helpful. So we decided to go with the SBF developed through the study as opposed to the one the CMF Clearinghouse. Again, kind of pulling in some of that expert judgment as much as we could. Next slide. Yeah, and then yeah, this is just a few remaining ones that we investigated per NCDOT's request. So in terms of the application of these results, what does that look like? As Brian mentioned, there's this larger prioritization process that these SBFs are falling into. So what the work we did resulted in about 10 new SBFs and confirmed 2 SBFs, because that's the other thing we wanted to do here is it wasn't just about developing new ones, but it was examining, can we look at these SBFs from a different angle using a different approach and see if what is already being recommended lines up. And in some cases we found that it did. And so we also conducted a sensitivity analysis to show what that impact was in the prioritization process, because we are just recommending these. There's a larger, because this is so tied to funding, as you can imagine, there's a lot of stakeholders who are involved in this process. So they are the ones who are actually going to look at what we identified and determine whether this is integrated into the prioritization process. And so try to equip them with understanding, if you do integrate this new SBF, just so you know, this is how it might impact your results. And part of that was developing, this is an example of one of the one-pagers that we put together to really succinctly explain that in layman's terms. And if there were any considerations we thought they might need to know, just in case questions popped up, we try to get ahead of that by putting that on these one-pagers and explaining, you know, this may seem funny to you, but here's why we did it. Yeah, and so that's essentially our approach, and really grateful to be able to talk to you about this. I'm from ITRI, but would be remiss if I didn't thank our partners at HSRC who are also on this call, because it really was a team effort along with NCDOT. So thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Brian and Joy. It's very interesting to hear what North Carolina has done there with the SBF. And then last but not least, I will turn it over to Srini to talk about ongoing and completed research related to CMFs to wrap us up today.
See my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to be talking about 3 NCHRP projects going in chronological order. The first one is NCHRP 1763. This was completed in 2017. They developed guidance for development application of CMFs. The next one is NCHRP 1772. This project has been going on for the last 5 years, will be completed soon. The last one is a project NCHRP 1795. It started last year with the goal of developing CMFs for ITS treatments, and this will be completed in 2022 or 2023. So the first project here, NCHRP 1763, this was led by Daniel Carter, who is now with NCDOT, and it had 3 objectives. The first objective was to develop guidelines for calibration of current CMFs to assess treatment effectiveness at sites for which the site characteristics may be different. Essentially, here you're talking about the transferability of CMFs. The second objective was to develop guidelines on how existing and future CMFs can be combined in a single location, multiple treatment. Let's say an agency decides to install shoulder rumble strips along with widening a shoulder, and CMS may be available for rumble strips separately and for shoulder widening separately, but how do you do the combined effect? And I think Kevin in his presentation had one example there. Third objective is develop recommended procedures for formulating and calibrating future CMFs that identify key influential factors. Essentially here you're talking about guidance for something called the crash modification function. So now to objective 1, here the goal was to develop guidance on CMF selection adjustment. The primary audience for this guidance was safety practitioners. So the guidance is provided on identifying the proposed treatment of a site, identifying the characteristics of a site, identifying existing CMFs, say from the clearinghouse, and then figure out which CMF is the best fit for the site under consideration. At this stage, guidance is provided on how a user can disaggregate a CMF into specific crash type or severity categories. And if there are multiple CMFs for the same treatment, there's a procedure for combining CMFs, or the user can select the most appropriate CMF. And objective 2 is to provide guidance on this estimating a CMF for the combined effect of 2 treatments. Again, this guidance here, the primary audience is safety practitioners. So there is initially the discussion of some issues encountered when considering the combined effect. Then there's a step-by-step procedure for calculating the combined effect based on the potential overlap of the treatments and the magnitude of the CMFs. And 5 different methods of combining CMFs were considered, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, Kevin had one example in his presentation. There's also some discussion on how to expand to more than 2 treatments, but the main focus of the guidance was on estimating the combined effect of 2 treatments. The third objective was to provide guidance on developing crash modification functions. Now, the difference between a crash modification function and a factor is a crash modification factor is just one number. Let's say, example 0.8, which means you expect a 20% reduction in crashes. You know, with a crash modification function, you have an equation instead of a factor, and that tells you how a CMF may vary depending on site characteristics. And the primary audience for this one is safety researchers. The goal is to discuss key issues while developing CM functions from different types of data, including cross-sectional data, as well as data from before-after studies. And 4 case studies were provided to assist the researcher in, using this procedures. Okay. In terms of the research products from NCHRP 1763, Appendix A has a procedure for estimating the effect of a proposed treatment of subject site. Appendix B has a procedure for estimating the combined safety effect of 3 treatments. Appendix C has a guidance for estimating CM functions. Then we also have Excel tools that can be used to implement the different procedures that have been developed and documented in Appendix A. So NCHRP has decided to publish the products as NCHRP Research Report 991. And the link to the pre-publication draft is right in front of you on the slide. In addition, I also want to mention that there are videos explaining some of the procedures developed in this project, and those were developed earlier, a few years ago, with support from Federal Highway. And they are also, the links for those are also available in here in the screen. Okay, now to a poll question before we go to the next two projects. So Caroline, if you can bring it up. How does your agency estimate the combined safety effect of true treatments? Either you can use quantitative procedures based on NCHRP 1763 or other sources or engineering judgment.
Okay, and Srini, 57% respondents replied engineering judgment, 43% quantitative based on NCHRP.
Okay. All right. Okay, good to know. Okay. Thank you. The next project. So NCHRP 1772. So this project, as I mentioned, has been going on for a few years. A pretty large effort, and many objectives, and some of the outcomes from this project, Taha discussed in his presentation. Essentially, kind of come up with a new method for rating CMFs. And in fact, the three objectives that are mentioned here, they essentially deal with that. Essentially, trying to develop a revised evaluation criteria for CMFs and develop a list of CMFs potentially for inclusion in the second edition of the HSM. And then the other thing that we did was conduct a CMF gap analysis, and then develop a guidance document for practitioner use. And then, so those the ones in bold were the original objectives when we started the project, and then a couple of other objectives were added, primarily with keeping the second edition of HSM in mind. One is something called a single state calibration. I'll talk about in a few minutes, and then also developing CMFs for roadside crashes. Okay. As Taha mentioned, this was done as part of NCHRP 1772. We reviewed rating procedures developed by other projects, including the CMF rating system developed in 2009. And then the details about this were provided in a previous presentation. So I won't go through that now. Okay. The other outcome of this project was a guidance document, which I have the outline here. And many of these elements of this guidance document are expected to be part of the Part D of the Highway Safety Manual, second edition that's upcoming. So the first chapter would be introduction, and then selecting CMFs, applying CMFs, developing CMFs, and then the appendices have information about the 1772 rating system, procedures for adjusting CMFs to local conditions, and then combining multiple CMFs for same countermeasure. And some of these also are derived from NCHRP 1763. And also this right now, the HSM2 is being developed as we speak. The HSM2 production contract is Texas A&M University, and they will be making decisions about how they're going to take the materials that we have developed and to be included in the next edition of the HSM. Okay, now to the single state or the common state calibration. So this is one of the new tasks that were added. And essentially what we're talking about here is calibrating the prediction models before they're included in the HSM to a common state. Now, why is this necessary? See, in the first edition of HSM that was published in 2010, before the SPFs were included in the HSM, the segment SPFs were calibrated to data from Washington, and intersection SPFs were calibrated to data from California. Although the intent was that each state would calibrate their models to the state, and a lot of states have done that, for doing relative comparisons, they could make use of the models from the HSM directly because they've been calibrated to the common state. So this is, if you want to do initial relative comparisons, if you have all the models that are compared to a calibrated common state, it can help. So we did this back in for the first edition, and we were asked to do the same thing for the second edition. This is more challenging because we have a lot more facility types, a lot more prediction models. So we did manage to complete this task using data from Ohio and also from North Carolina. But one of the limitations was because you have so many different facility types, some of the facility type, the calibration is based on limited data. So I think the production contract is going to take a look at to see if they have to make any changes to what we did. CMS for roadside characteristics. So this is again a new task. If some of you who are familiar with the first edition of the HSM, the roadside hazard rating 1 through 7 is used to figure out how the safety of a roadside can be incorporated as part of the predicting the number of crashes. So essentially, with this process, what you have is you have photographs in the HSM that represent different hazard conditions, and then an agency needs to look at the photograph and then compare it with the site that they're looking at and assign a rating. So this is somewhat of a subjective procedure, and so FHWA was interested in developing a more objective system. So they funded NCHRP 1754 that actually developed CMFs for roadside characteristics. But when the HSM ASTO committees reviewed that, they found quite a few inconsistencies in the results. So they weren't very comfortable in taking the NCHRP 1754 and directly using the HSM. So they asked 1772, can you refine the results from 1754? Essentially taking the results from 1754, using results from other studies, and developing a revised set of CMFs, which we have done as well. So that would be part of the final deliverables for 1772. Another outcome of this project is conducting something called as a CMF gap analysis. So the first part was to determine the overall quality of CMFs in different categories or different treatment categories, and then figure out the gaps. And these gaps can be used by different agencies, including Federal Highway or NCHRP, into identifying where you want to put the money into developing future CMFs. And this has been submitted to NCHRP for the panel review last week. So the next steps here are that the NCHRP panel is reviewing the deliverables, and the final report should be published next year. Okay. The next project, last project that I want to quickly go over is NCHRP 1795, which will develop CMS for ITS applications. And so the goal is to develop CMS for commonly deployed ITS applications, also provide case studies of safety benefit cost ratios. And then essentially, here's a list of ITS applications that we are considering as part of this project. So the first thing when you have to do any kind of evaluation, or one of the first things, is to find out where we can get data. So for that, we did a web-based survey, try to understand what ITS treatments agencies have implemented and what data are available. So we sent invitations to ASTO committees and also the FHWA TMC Pool Fund Study Group, as well as the Enterprise Pool Fund Study Group. And these were also forward to MPOs. And then once we got the results, we did follow-up interviews to get more insight into, we did these interviews with selected agencies to get further insight into the data from the individual agencies. And then using this information, we developed a data collection plan, data analysis plan, and a plan for developing benefit cost ratios. And this was provided to the NCHRP panel as part of a phase 2 work plan. So, and then the panel asked us to go on to the next stage of the project. And so in terms of data analysis methods, we'll be considering two categories of methods that some of you may have seen, before after empirical base or a full base method, or a cross-sectional method, and both have pros and cons. So the EB method is accepted in the research communities, but you need to have installation data. And if a treatment has been in place for many years, then it's hard to do a before-after evaluation. And depending on the type of treatment, that may reduce the sample size that we have. So we're going to be using some cross-sectional methods as well. But we're going to be using certain, more advanced methods so that we can get more reliable CMFs come out of the cross-sectional methods. In terms of the current activities in NCHRP 1795, essentially we are focusing on compiling the data right now. Once the data have been compiled, we can go ahead and develop the CMF and conduct the benefit cost ratio. So the project is expected to be completed in late 2022 or 2023. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Srini, for that update. It's great to see all the research that's going on related to CMFs, and I know we benefit from the outcomes of that. So thank you for sharing that information with us. I know we're running close to the end of today's webinar, so I want to check in with Caroline and see if we have any questions for our friends in Wisconsin or North Carolina before we wrap up today.
We have a few questions, yes. This question is for Kevin from Justin. Is the methodology to combine CMFs project specific or same for all projects?
It is the same for all projects. It's a good question.
And a question for Brian from Ranjit. Who is the driver of getting a data-driven approach signed into law? What role did the DOT play?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, that kind of happened because there was, it may have happened out of publicity actually. You know, there's been this kind of long-held notion that goes way back in time that, you know, highway project decisions are kind of decided in a smoke-filled back room. So it was kind of to get more public trust in the decision-making that goes into the funding of highway projects. So I think there was probably a couple events that happened back in 2013 that kind of spurred that along. And yeah, obviously DOT was very supportive of that legislation as it got passed.
Okay, and here's another one that I believe is for you, Kevin. When combining Part D CMFs, how do you apply the standard error?
Yeah, honestly, we don't. We basically know that the CMFs are developed with a standard error in mind, that it is something that we still need to be conscious of, but we really just use the point estimates, and the standard error comes into play more when we are selecting the CMFs to use and when we put them on our list. So you know, we basically say that we've gone through and vetted the CMFs on our list. We feel confident in these, and then we're just going to take the point estimates of those. So it's a lot easier for us to then apply them and combine them.
Great, thank you. And Taha, there's one question for you. Is there a minimum star rating recommended to use for benefit cost analysis? And if you're responding, Taha, unmute yourself.
Oops, sorry, I am here now. Yep. It's a very good question. So we do have started this, you know, guys, in the clearinghouse. They do indicate the quality of the CMF and the study, you know, that develop the CMF itself. But we have always recommended people, you know, to use the star quality ratings along with the applicability of the CMF. So you always take into account the applicability of the CMF, you know, to your specific conditions before deciding, you know, which CMF to use. So yeah, star rating can be a factor, but you know, in some cases, you know, you might not find a higher star rated CMF that would apply to your specific use cases. So in that case, you know, you might have to you know, settle out, you know, on something that's lower star rated and needed 3 stars now. In those cases, you know, where CMF is more and more applicable to your specific use case.
And I think there are a few more questions, but I don't think we have enough time to answer them, Karen. So everyone on the webinar, we will be working on getting these responses together and posted on the website as soon as we can in the next few weeks.
Thank you, Caroline. And I think I lost the share screen thing. If you could redo that. Yes, I agree. Thank you for all those great questions. I'm sure there are many more, and like Caroline, I apologize that we weren't able to get to them during the live portion of the Q&A today, but we will be sure to make sure that we address those and provide some written responses back out to everyone and post them to the CMF Clearinghouse website. I just wanted to give you a quick heads up about a couple of activities that we'll be working on over the next year, so you're not surprised when you see some changes to the CMF Clearinghouse. So we had the pleasure of convening a couple of focus group meetings last week to talk to researchers and practitioners about opportunities to improve both the CMF Clearinghouse content as well as the functionality. And we heard a lot of great ideas. And so I think our next step there is to determine what we can implement in the short term. And then, there are definitely some ideas that will take a little bit longer to plan and prioritize and get implemented into the CMF Clearinghouse. So we'll be working on some of those changes in the near future, and then some of those will take a little bit longer. And then we'll also be converting the programming language for the Clearinghouse from Cold Fusion to PHP. I don't think that you'll notice that on the user end too much, but I did want to let you know that that was coming down the pike. And then probably will affect you more is a change in the domain name. So we'll be going from .org to a .dot.gov, bringing that over to the Federal Highway servers. And so we'll, of course, give you some heads up before that happens and plan to redirect users for a while. But I just want to give you a heads up that will be coming sometime over the next year or so. But there'll be lots more communication about that and some of the other things that I just mentioned. There are two final things I wanted to mention. When you exit the webinar today, there will be a survey. We would very much appreciate your feedback on our performance today. We do a webinar like this every year, and we use the input you provide on those evaluations to both improve the delivery of the webinars as well as identify potential topics of interest for future webinars and activities. And then following today's webinar, you will also receive a follow-up email. This email will include a link to download a printable certificate of attendance for 1 hour of professional development instruction. I know we all rely on that so much for our different licenses. And if there are multiple attendees at your site, you can forward the link to the other participants so that they can download and print the certificate with their name. So with that, I would like to thank our presenters for sharing their experiences and practices with us today, and all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. I hope that you found the information that was shared today useful. I think we covered a lot of bases, and I think I would encourage you to go and explore the CMF Clearinghouse website and learn more about the resources that we have available to you. So thank you, everyone. Have a good day and be safe.